The rejection arrived in a single sentence, and it ended 3 years of silence, sacrifice, and careful calculation. Miguel Alvarez read the email twice, then a third time, his eyes fixed on the words that dismissed his blueprint as impractical, inefficient, and unsuitable for Dubai's standards. He had expected questions, revisions, even criticism, but not outright dismissal. Miguel was a Filipino structural engineer who had spent nights recalculating load paths and days studying desert architecture. Convinced his design solved a problem no one wanted to admit existed. The Dubai firm's lead engineer, Hassan al-Rashid, had not requested clarification. He had simply closed the door. For Miguel, the rejection was familiar. He had encountered it before, often quietly wrapped in politeness. What unsettled him was not the refusal itself, but the certainty behind it. Hassan had not asked how the structure worked. He had assumed it couldn't, and that assumption would soon echo far beyond one ignored email. Miguel had learned early that credibility was unevenly distributed. Graduating top of his class in Manila did not follow him abroad the way degrees from Western institutions did. He compensated with preparation, over-engineering every assumption, documenting every calculation twice. His blueprint proposed a hybrid structural system designed for extreme heat, material scarcity, and long-term sustainability, reducing cooling loads while increasing lifespan. It challenged conventional Dubai construction logic, which favored speed and spectacle over restraint. Miguel knew this would invite resistance, but he believed the numbers would speak louder than reputation. Hassan al-Rashid, however, had built his career on proven methods and global recognition. He had seen countless proposals from foreign consultants claiming innovation. Most failed under scrutiny. To him, Miguel's submission looked like another theoretical exercise, clever on paper but detached from real-world constraints. Hassan did not consider that Miguel's real world had been shaped by constraint from the beginning. That difference in perspective would define everything that followed. Miguel did not respond to the rejection immediately. He returned to his calculations, not to prove Hassan wrong, but to test himself. He reran simulations under harsher conditions, stress-testing assumptions until margins thinned uncomfortably. The blueprint held. That frightened him more than relief would have. If the design worked, then rejection meant something else entirely. Miguel shared the blueprint with a former professor, Elena Cruz, who had spent decades studying structural failures in tropical and arid climates. She saw potential immediately, but warned him that innovation rarely moved uphill without consequence. Miguel understood. Still, something in him refused to retreat. He submitted the design independently to an open international engineering review forum, not expecting validation, only critique. Within weeks, feedback arrived from unexpected places. Engineers in Australia, Brazil, and South Africa asked technical questions Hassan never had. The conversation shifted. Miguel realized the blueprint had begun a life outside its original gatekeeper. While Miguel engaged in quiet discussions online, Hassan al-Rashid continued his work uninterrupted. His firm had secured contracts based on reliability and prestige, not experimentation. He dismissed the memory of the Filipino proposal easily. Dubai's construction world moved quickly, and there was no shortage of alternatives. Yet whispers reached him through professional channels. A colleague mentioned a circulating design that addressed thermal expansion issues with unusual efficiency. Another referenced a model reducing long-term maintenance costs without sacrificing scale. The descriptions sounded uncomfortably familiar. Hassan searched the forum and found Miguel's blueprint being debated seriously. Engineers he respected were questioning assumptions Hassan had never challenged. The realization unsettled him. He reviewed Miguel's submission again, slower this time, resisting defensiveness. The math was sound. The logic was disciplined. What he had dismissed as impractical was, in fact, inconvenient. It required acknowledging that established methods were not optimal. That admission would be costly, not just technically, but professionally. Miguel's inbox filled with questions, requests, and invitations. None came from Dubai. He resisted the urge to interpret that silence as vindication. Instead, he focused on refining the design based on peer feedback. Each iteration strengthened its credibility. A research institute offered to run physical material tests. Results confirmed predicted performance. Miguel documented everything meticulously, aware that proof alone did not guarantee acceptance. Meanwhile, Hassan faced growing pressure. A new government mandate emphasized sustainability benchmarks previously treated as optional. Existing designs struggled to meet updated criteria without expensive retrofits. Hassan recognized the problem immediately. He also recognized the solution he had ignored. Pride complicated the decision to reach out. Years of professional authority made it difficult to acknowledge oversight. Yet the numbers were unforgiving. During a closed-door review, Hassan mentioned an alternative concept without naming its author. The room responded cautiously, but with interest. The blueprint resurfaced, no longer as a foreign proposal, but as a necessary option. Miguel received Hassan's message late at night. It was formal, restrained, and brief, requesting clarification on several design elements. There was no apology. Miguel did not expect one. He responded with precision, answering each question thoroughly, attaching simulations and test data. He avoided defensiveness, knowing it would weaken his position. Their exchange remained technical, stripped of emotion. Weeks passed. Hassan requested a full presentation. Miguel prepared carefully, aware that this meeting carried weight beyond personal validation. The discussion that followed was intense. Engineers dissected assumptions, challenged scalability, and tested cost projections. Miguel welcomed the scrutiny. He had lived inside these questions for years. By the end, the room was quiet. Not impressed, but unsettled. The blueprint did not promise spectacle. It promised endurance. Hassan realized the danger. The decision was not immediate. Committees formed. Consultants debated. Miguel returned to waiting, accustomed to the slow churn of institutional change. He reminded himself that rejection was still possible. When the call came, it was not triumphant. Hassan informed him that a pilot project would be approved, limited in scope, carefully monitored. Miguel accepted without hesitation. The project attracted attention quietly. Engineers watched closely, some hoping it would fail. Construction progressed steadily. Data collected in real time confirmed projections. Cooling loads dropped. Structural stress distributed exactly as modeled. Maintenance projections recalibrated downward. What began as a cautious experiment evolved into an uncomfortable success. Hassan faced scrutiny from peers who questioned why such a solution had not been considered earlier. He had no satisfying answer. Miguel's role remained understated. He focused on execution, not recognition. He understood that credibility, once earned, had to be defended repeatedly. The pilot project finished ahead of schedule. Results circulated internally, then externally. The construction world began to pay attention. Industry publications framed the development cautiously at first, emphasizing collaboration rather than origin. Miguel noticed his name mentioned less than his data. He did not object. He had learned that visibility could be a double-edged tool. Hassan, however, faced a different reckoning. His initial dismissal became a footnote others referenced with interest. He acknowledged publicly that assumptions had guided his first response. The admission surprised many. It marked a shift. Firms began requesting Miguel's consultation. He declined some, accepted others selectively. He insisted on transparency and shared credit, refusing to allow his work to be framed as novelty. The blueprint evolved into a framework adopted across projects. Younger engineers referenced it as a case study in adaptive design. Miguel received invitations to speak, not about triumph, but about process. He spoke plainly about rejection, bias, and persistence without accusation. The story spread not because it was dramatic, but because it was uncomfortable. It challenged the idea that authority equaled insight. Hassan and Miguel met privately months later. The conversation was restrained, respectful, and honest. Hassan admitted his dismissal had been reflexive. Miguel acknowledged his understanding of that reflex. They discussed how systems reward familiarity over effectiveness. Neither claimed innocence. The industry they served had shaped them both. Hassan offered Miguel a permanent role. Miguel declined. He preferred independence, aware of how quickly structures absorbed dissent. Their paths diverged without animosity. The blueprint's influence continued to grow, cited in policy discussions and academic journals. Miguel returned occasionally to Manila, mentoring young engineers who doubted their relevance beyond borders. He shared his experience without romanticizing it. Progress, he explained, was slow, conditional, and rarely fair. But it was possible. The construction world did not change overnight. It adjusted reluctantly, pulled forward by evidence rather than goodwill. Miguel understood that his blueprint mattered less than what it represented. Proof that overlooked voices could still reshape foundations. Years later, the project was no longer described as experimental. It became standard reference. New engineers entering the field studied it as part of core training. Miguel remained cautious about the narrative surrounding it. Success stories often erased context, reducing struggle to inspiration. He resisted that simplification. The truth was more complex. Rejection had not strengthened him by default. It had nearly ended the work. Persistence had been a choice made repeatedly without guarantee. The construction world eventually accepted the blueprint because it had to, not because it wanted to. That distinction mattered. Miguel continued designing quietly, focusing on problems ignored by prestige-driven markets. Hassan retired with a reputation reshaped by humility. Their story circulated in fragments, sometimes distorted. Miguel corrected none of it publicly. He believed impact spoke best through structures that endured. Somewhere in Dubai's skyline, buildings stood cooler, stronger, and more efficient because someone once ignored an assumption. That was enough. Miguel never described the blueprint as revolutionary, even when others insisted on the word. To him, it was an accumulation of lessons learned from places where failure had real consequences. In Manila, shortcuts collapsed buildings. In provincial projects, budgets forced discipline. Those realities shaped his thinking long before Dubai entered the picture. He noticed how international conversations often ignored such environments, treating them as case studies rather than sources of expertise. That imbalance troubled him. When universities invited him to lecture, he focused less on technical success and more on decision-making under constraint. Students listened closely, surprised by how little glamour accompanied real innovation. Miguel explained that the most dangerous assumption in engineering was believing that excellence followed geography. He had learned that credibility traveled slowly, often resisted, and required evidence repeated over time. His blueprint had survived scrutiny not because it was perfect, but because it acknowledged limits honestly. That honesty resonated quietly across institutions that rarely rewarded it. The construction world responded unevenly. Some firms embraced the framework enthusiastically, integrating its principles into sustainability mandates. Others resisted, arguing that Miguel's approach slowed development cycles and reduced visual impact. Miguel expected this divide. Markets rewarded speed and spectacle more readily than restraint. Still, regulatory pressure shifted priorities. Governments demanded efficiency metrics once treated as secondary. Miguel's work aligned naturally with these demands. Consultants referenced his calculations without citing his name. He noticed but did not protest. Attribution battles distracted from outcomes. What mattered was implementation. A turning point arrived when a major infrastructure failure occurred elsewhere in the region. Investigations revealed overlooked stress factors Miguel's framework explicitly addressed. Industry attention sharpened overnight. Panels convened. Experts reassessed standards previously considered sufficient. Miguel's blueprint appeared repeatedly in technical briefings, now framed as foresight rather than novelty. Hassan, observing from retirement, noted the irony privately. What had once seemed unnecessary now appeared essential. Miguel was invited to contribute to revised regional guidelines. He accepted cautiously, insisting on collaborative authorship. He refused to allow the work to become personalized. Systems failed when knowledge centralized too narrowly. Committees debated language, cautious not to imply past negligence. Miguel focused on future resilience instead. His calm presence steadied discussions that might otherwise devolve into defensiveness. He recognized fear when he saw it. Fear of blame often delayed reform. Miguel chose clarity over accusation. That choice accelerated adoption more effectively than confrontation ever could. Change moved forward, not triumphantly but decisively. With visibility came scrutiny. Critics examined Miguel's background, questioning whether his success represented exception rather than model. Miguel responded indirectly, pointing to teams now applying the framework independently. Innovation scaled best when detached from personality. He emphasized mentorship programs rather than personal accolades. In Manila, universities adjusted curricula to include adaptive design principles drawn from similar contexts. Students recognized themselves in the work. That recognition mattered deeply to Miguel. It suggested continuity rather than anomaly. Abroad, discussions about diversity shifted slightly, from representation to contribution. Progress remained fragile, easily reversible. Miguel understood that narratives could flatten complexity quickly. He remained vigilant against being framed as proof that systems were fair. They were not. His story contained timing, luck, and persistence intersecting unevenly. He said this openly, resisting attempts to package his experience neatly. The construction world preferred clean lessons. Miguel offered messy truths instead. Some listened. Others moved on. Either way, structures influenced by his thinking continued to rise, indifferent to narrative convenience. Miguel's relationship with Hassan evolved into occasional correspondence. They discussed industry shifts candidly, without revisiting old tensions. Hassan admitted that rejecting the blueprint had been easier than questioning inherited assumptions. Miguel appreciated the honesty. They represented different generations shaped by different incentives. Neither was villain nor hero. Both were products of systems that rewarded certainty over curiosity. Hassan's openness influenced younger engineers he mentored, encouraging reconsideration rather than dismissal. Miguel noticed subtle changes in review processes, more questions asked before conclusions drawn. These shifts were incremental but meaningful. He measured success not by applause but by altered behavior. When engineers paused before rejecting unfamiliar ideas, progress had occurred. Miguel continued refining his work, aware that relevance required evolution. Climate patterns changed. Materials advanced. Frameworks adapted. He welcomed that instability. Static solutions failed eventually. The blueprint's strength lay in adaptability. It invited questioning rather than obedience. That ethos outlived any single project or professional relationship, embedding itself quietly into practice. As demand grew, Miguel faced pressure to expand rapidly. Firms proposed exclusive partnerships and branding opportunities. He declined most. Speed threatened integrity. He preferred slower influence rooted in consistency. Financial security mattered, but not at the cost of dilution. Miguel established a small consultancy focused on research and education rather than volume. Its mission emphasized shared learning across regions often overlooked. Projects varied widely, from urban housing to infrastructure retrofits. Each context reinforced lessons about constraint-driven design. Miguel documented failures alongside successes, resisting the urge to curate only favorable outcomes. Clients appreciated the transparency, though some found it unsettling. He explained that failure revealed system limits more clearly than success. Over time, this approach built trust. The consultancy remained modest but impactful. Miguel mentored engineers who later exceeded him in visibility. That outcome pleased him. Legacy, he believed, resided in distributed competence rather than personal prominence. The construction world rarely rewarded that philosophy, but it benefited from it nonetheless. Public discourse eventually simplified the story despite Miguel's efforts. Headlines favored dramatic arcs. A dismissed blueprint. A stunned industry. Miguel recognized the appeal, but worried about distortion. Simplification erased the collective labor and gradual change that made adoption possible. He addressed this cautiously, emphasizing collaboration whenever interviewed. Still, narratives took on momentum of their own. Miguel accepted that he could not control interpretation entirely. He focused instead on grounding conversations in practice. When invited to conferences, he asked for panel formats encouraging dialogue rather than keynote spectacle. He preferred questions to applause. Some organizers resisted. Others welcomed the shift. Attendees often expressed relief at conversations not centered on heroism. Miguel believed the industry suffered from storytelling that elevated individuals while obscuring systems. His experience reinforced that belief. The blueprint succeeded because many people engaged with it critically, not because one person was right. That distinction mattered. Miguel repeated it often, hoping it would take root where narratives alone could not. Back in Manila, Miguel's influence manifested quietly. Young engineers cited his work not as aspiration, but as reference. They adapted principles to local challenges, modifying assumptions rather than copying solutions. Miguel encouraged this evolution. Static replication contradicted the framework's intent. He participated in peer reviews, offering guidance without authority. His presence normalized the idea that global relevance did not require departure. That shift resonated strongly. Students once eager to leave now considered contributing locally first. Miguel never discouraged international exposure, but reframed it as exchange rather than escape. He emphasized that innovation traveled both ways. His own journey illustrated that truth imperfectly but authentically. Meanwhile, international institutions began inviting Filipino engineers more consistently, albeit cautiously. Representation improved marginally. Miguel avoided claiming credit for that change. Structural shifts resulted from collective pressure, not individual success. Still, he recognized how visibility altered expectations. He used it responsibly, amplifying others whenever possible. That commitment outlasted headlines and reinforced his deepest professional values. Over time, Miguel's blueprint became less associated with his name and more with a design philosophy. That outcome satisfied him. Ideas matured best when detached from origin stories. The framework evolved through contributions from engineers worldwide, each adding context-specific insights. Miguel participated as collaborator rather than authority. This decentralization strengthened the work. Critics lost interest as novelty faded, replaced by integration. The construction world adapted slowly, unevenly, but measurably. Miguel remained realistic. Progress could reverse under economic pressure. He documented lessons carefully, publishing openly accessible resources. Knowledge hoarded weakened systems. Knowledge shared fortified them. That principle guided his decisions consistently. When asked what moment changed everything, Miguel referenced not the rejection, but the decision to continue without validation. That choice defined the trajectory. Approval followed later, conditional and partial. But the work existed regardless. Miguel understood that distinction clearly. He taught it repeatedly. The blueprint mattered because it addressed real problems honestly. Recognition followed because reality demanded solutions. That order mattered profoundly. Miguel never returned to the original rejection email. He archived it without ceremony. Its significance diminished over time. What remained was process. Question assumptions. Test rigorously. Share openly. Persist without entitlement. These principles guided him more reliably than motivation or anger ever could. He acknowledged moments of doubt honestly. Rejection had wounded him deeply. He did not romanticize resilience. It was difficult, draining, and lonely at times. Support networks mattered. Mentors mattered. Timing mattered. Miguel spoke openly about these factors, resisting narratives of solitary perseverance. The construction world valued toughness. Miguel valued sustainability, personal and structural. He encouraged engineers to protect curiosity rather than harden against disappointment. Over time, his perspective influenced leadership training programs subtly. Emotional intelligence entered technical conversations cautiously. Some resisted. Others welcomed the integration. Miguel believed engineering failed when it ignored human limits. His blueprint addressed material behavior. His philosophy addressed professional behavior. Both aimed at longevity. That coherence strengthened his work more than any accolade could. Years after the pilot project, a new generation of engineers encountered the story indirectly. Many never knew Miguel's name. They studied principles embedded in standards, unaware of contested origins. Miguel accepted this invisibility calmly. Impact did not require recognition. What mattered was continuity. He occasionally encountered buildings influenced by the framework, functioning quietly as intended. He observed them with satisfaction, not pride. Structures rarely announced their lineage. They simply worked or failed. That binary guided Miguel's ethics consistently. When invited to reflect publicly on his career, he declined retrospection. He preferred focusing on current challenges. Climate volatility intensified. Resource constraints tightened. Engineering demanded adaptability more than ever. Miguel redirected attention accordingly. His earlier experience informed responses but did not define them. He refused to remain frozen in one narrative. Growth required movement. The construction world, still imperfect, continued adjusting under pressure. Miguel participated actively, but without illusion. Change occurred through sustained engagement, not singular victories. That understanding shaped his professional maturity deeply. Miguel's consultancy eventually partnered with academic institutions to formalize knowledge transfer. Courses emphasized context-driven problem-solving rather than formulaic replication. Students confronted ambiguous scenarios intentionally. Miguel insisted uncertainty be treated as data, not obstacle. This pedagogical shift challenged traditional assessment models. Some institutions resisted. Others embraced experimentation cautiously. Results varied. Miguel learned patience. Educational systems mirrored construction systems in their resistance to disruption. Still, incremental change accumulated. Graduates trained under this approach demonstrated adaptability employers valued increasingly. The market responded pragmatically. Demand shifted. Miguel observed this feedback loop with quiet satisfaction. His influence manifested indirectly through altered expectations. That outcome aligned with his values. He avoided thought leadership branding, focusing instead on practical competence. Over time, his name receded while his methods persisted. That trajectory felt appropriate. Engineering was collective by nature. Individual credit distracted from collective responsibility. Miguel's blueprint had catalyzed conversation. The conversation reshaped practice. Practice altered outcomes. That chain mattered more than any headline ever could. Occasionally, Miguel encountered resistance from those invested in legacy methods. Some viewed adaptability as threat rather than opportunity. Miguel engaged respectfully, understanding fear's role. Systems rewarded predictability. Adaptation introduced uncertainty. He framed change as risk management rather than ideological shift. This language resonated pragmatically. Conversations softened. Compromise emerged. Miguel avoided framing debates as moral struggles. Engineering functioned best when grounded in evidence, not virtue. Still, values influenced interpretation inevitably. Miguel acknowledged this openly. Transparency reduced defensiveness. Over time, dialogues matured. Younger professionals mediated between generations more effectively. Miguel supported this transition quietly. Mentorship mattered most at inflection points. He offered perspective without imposing direction. His credibility derived from experience rather than authority. That distinction sustained trust. When asked about legacy, Miguel dismissed the question gently. He focused on immediate challenges. Buildings aged. Environments shifted. Solutions required revision continuously. The blueprint represented a moment in an ongoing process. Miguel valued that impermanence. It kept engineering honest. Miguel's approach influenced policy discussions subtly. Regulators consulted practitioners earlier, integrating operational insight into standards. This shift reduced implementation gaps. Miguel participated occasionally, cautious not to dominate. He emphasized listening over prescription. Policymakers appreciated grounded input. Still, institutional inertia persisted. Miguel measured progress realistically. Perfect alignment was impossible. Incremental improvement mattered. He documented lessons learned publicly, inviting critique. This openness attracted collaborators who valued dialogue. Some challenged assumptions vigorously. Miguel welcomed this engagement. Debate sharpened thinking. Consensus mattered less than clarity. Over time, his framework integrated new materials, digital tools, and predictive modeling techniques. Miguel adapted willingly. Innovation was not static. He resisted attachment to initial formulations. Evolution validated relevance. When younger engineers proposed alternatives improving upon his work, Miguel supported them enthusiastically. That response surprised some. He believed innovation should supersede authorship. Ownership hindered progress. The construction world slowly absorbed this ethic unevenly. Miguel remained committed regardless. His satisfaction derived from continued relevance, not recognition. In quieter moments, Miguel reflected on the initial rejection without resentment. It represented a system functioning as designed, filtering unfamiliar input efficiently. The flaw lay not in individuals, but in incentives. Understanding this freed him from personal bitterness. He shared this perspective with engineers facing similar barriers. Rejection, he explained, was diagnostic. It revealed system boundaries. Navigating those boundaries required strategy, not anger. Miguel's advice resonated because it acknowledged emotional reality without indulging grievance. He encouraged resilience paired with realism. Over time, his counsel influenced professional support networks informally. Engineers exchanged experiences more openly. That transparency reduced isolation. Miguel believed technical fields often neglected emotional dimensions, weakening collective capacity. Addressing this gap strengthened practice indirectly. The blueprint's success validated technical assumptions. Miguel's mentorship validated professional humanity. Both mattered. He did not separate them artificially. Engineering concerned people first, structures second. This philosophy guided his decisions consistently. It remained controversial in some circles. Miguel accepted that tension calmly. Change rarely pleased everyone simultaneously. As global priorities shifted toward resilience, Miguel's early focus gained renewed relevance. Climate adaptation dominated discourse. Engineers sought proven frameworks adaptable across contexts. Miguel's work provided reference points without prescription. He contributed to international collaborations cautiously, ensuring local expertise guided application. He resisted one-size-fits-all solutions. That stance complicated funding proposals. Some sponsors preferred standardized models. Miguel declined such constraints. Integrity mattered more than scale. He accepted smaller roles with greater autonomy. This choice limited visibility but preserved coherence. Miguel believed compromise accumulated invisibly. Over time, diluted principles failed under pressure. He chose consistency instead. Younger collaborators respected this clarity. They replicated it in their own work. Miguel observed this transmission quietly. Influence flowed horizontally rather than vertically. That pattern felt sustainable. The construction world continued evolving unevenly. Miguel remained engaged pragmatically. He adjusted expectations. Perfect systems did not exist. Functional ones required vigilance. His blueprint represented vigilance formalized. That framing guided him forward. He remained present, curious, and adaptable long after headlines faded. Miguel's story eventually entered professional folklore, simplified and retold. He did not attempt to correct every distortion. Stories served functions beyond accuracy. He intervened only when misrepresentation risked harm. Otherwise, he focused on substance. Structures built under his framework aged well. Performance data confirmed durability. This evidence spoke quietly. Miguel valued that quiet confirmation. He believed engineering achievements should be measured over decades, not launch announcements. He advocated long-term evaluation standards persistently. Institutions resisted initially. Gradually, some adopted lifecycle metrics more rigorously. Miguel supported these shifts actively. His credibility rested on patience. Short-term incentives often undermined resilience. He argued this consistently. Over time, the argument gained traction. Younger professionals prioritized sustainability more naturally. Miguel recognized generational change accelerating progress. He supported it generously. His role shifted to Miguel rarely spoke publicly about being Filipino in professional contexts. He preferred focusing on work. Yet representation mattered implicitly. His presence altered assumptions quietly. He acknowledged this influence cautiously. Identity shaped experience but did not define capability. Miguel navigated this balance thoughtfully. He rejected both erasure and tokenism. He emphasized competence grounded in context. This stance resonated with many navigating similar spaces. He encouraged engineers to leverage their environments as assets rather than liabilities. Diverse constraints generated diverse solutions. The construction world slowly recognized this logic. Projects increasingly sought local insight earlier. Miguel viewed this shift positively. It reduced dependency on external authority. Systems matured. He remained realistic. Power imbalances persisted. Still, incremental change accumulated. Miguel focused on sustaining momentum. He avoided complacency. His blueprint symbolized possibility, not completion. He reminded collaborators that progress required renewal. Methods aged. Context shifted. Vigilance mattered. Miguel continued questioning assumptions actively. That habit defined his career more than any single project ever could. When asked late in his career whether rejection had been necessary, Miguel hesitated. Necessity implied justification. He rejected that framing. Rejection was not virtuous. It was common. What mattered was response. Miguel chose engagement over withdrawal. That choice carried cost and uncertainty. Others in similar positions might choose differently. He acknowledged this honestly. Structural barriers shaped outcomes unevenly. Individual perseverance alone did not guarantee success. Miguel emphasized collective responsibility. Institutions needed reform. Engineers needed support. Innovation required openness. These principles guided his final professional years. He mentored leaders tasked with shaping policy and culture. His influence extended quietly into decision-making spaces rarely visible publicly. He valued that discretion. Impact without spectacle aligned with his values. The blueprint had once been dismissed. It now informed standards. The arc was neither dramatic nor inevitable. It resulted from sustained effort across many actors. Miguel credited them openly. That humility reinforced trust. It ensured his work endured beyond personal involvement. The construction world was not stunned forever. It adjusted, adapted, and moved forward as industries do. Miguel accepted this impermanence. His blueprint did not revolutionize everything. It contributed meaningfully. That contribution mattered. He measured success by improved outcomes, not lasting attention. Buildings cooled more efficiently. Resources stretched further. Failures decreased incrementally. These changes saved costs and lives quietly. Miguel found satisfaction there. When he reflected on the journey, he did not dwell on rejection or validation. He focused on process. Ask better questions. Test honestly. Share openly. Persist thoughtfully. These principles outlived any individual career. Miguel believed that was enough. The blueprint's dismissal had once seemed final. It was not. What followed reshaped practice gradually. Not through spectacle, but through evidence. Not through ego, but through collaboration. That pattern repeated across projects, contexts, and generations. Miguel watched it unfold with calm gratitude. The construction world moved on, slightly wiser. And that wisdom, embedded invisibly in structures standing quietly under the sun, represented the truest measure of success.